Hey, and welcome back to another episode of TechBound Podcast, where I talk to the brightest minds in marketing and dissect how they think and what makes them successful. In this episode, I speak to Phil Nottingham, who is the brand and marketing strategist at Wistia. In this episode, we speak about the power of long-form video content, why it's so important to have in your strategy, what it's like to compete against YouTube, and Phil's deep love for music. So make sure you don't miss this, watch until the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, to Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to podcasts to, and give me a thumbs up or a 5-star review. Enjoy. 3, 2, 1. Phil, welcome to the show and thanks for being on.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
This is going to be great. I have so many questions. The first one is about long-form video content. Why is long-form video content exciting right now? Why is it interesting?
Sure. So I'll just start by apologizing to your audience that I sound like I've got a face full of candy. I've just had some surgery, so that's why. And if you ever heard me elsewhere and this sounds a bit odd, that's just a bit why. So long-form video content, why is it interesting? So I think the exciting thing and the reason why the trend is moving from short-form to long-form, in my view, is largely driven by kind of the desire for companies to build brands. Now, historically, the way we've done that has always been, driven by advertising and short form stuff. But in a world where we have, a million ads coming at us all the time, skippable video and everything, the truth remains, like, the majority of ads that you interact with, you probably don't remember, you probably don't care about. That didn't used to be the case, but this rule of 7 idea that, you just need to keep building impressions and somehow people remember you, that kind of idea is broken now. So we have to have found a new way to kind of engage people and build up that kind of brand efficacy and get people to start talking and communicating about brands. And one of the most clear and obvious ways you can do that is through long form content that engages perhaps a smaller group of audience than some of your traditional ads, but really engages them in a very direct and meaningful way, such that they become brand advocates and start to talk about you. So there's a lot of companies that have kind of gone down this route, and I think the same trend is seen with podcasting. It's exactly the same kind of idea. Well, okay, let's build up this long form content that goes into certain ideas or topics or whatever in a great deal of depth, appeals to a relatively narrow audience compared to some of our other marketing. But the aim is to really build a huge audience of advocates and fans, really, with the content. And what we're finding is that people who do that are seeing that their brand grows organically, that they improve word of mouth, they have that kind of rock solid base of fans, of audiences who are going to start talking about them and promoting them to other people. So that's how I think it's happening and why this trend is starting to pick up in a meaningful way.
Talk to me a bit about brands that are doing this really well right now.
Sure. So I think it's kind of started off slightly in the B2B space. So we see companies like MailChimp have gone down this route. Who else have done it? Someone like Drift have been spending a lot of time with this. So some of the B2B SaaS stuff have started. Certainly Wistia, obviously that's kind of the space we're in as well. But that's not wholly true. There's been a lot of companies that have built sort of web series on YouTube. Uber did some of this stuff. And, there's just been that kind of trend towards longer form. Can we create a sort of bigger piece of content that is maybe dealing with something in a bit more depth than an ad would? And that seems to be the trend. And we're seeing a lot of companies do this. On the SMB side, there's a company just down the road from me in London called like Andertons, which is just a guitar shop. And they've started making like really long form, like every week they release 2 or 3 50-minute videos, and they've built an entire brand off the base of this long-form web series, essentially. And that's exactly the kind of trend that we're seeing mirrored across B2B and B2C.
Why do you think long-form works better for that than short-form?
I think it's because it's about investment from the audience perspective. So, every day I go on the internet and I'm deluged with hundreds of ads. I remember very few of them, if any. And because it's a very one-sided investment, they are spending money and time to try and get in front of me. I am reluctant and trying to get away from them. So I'm basically always skipping the ads or moving. So there's no mental cognitive investment from my side. But if I'm going to sit down and watch something for 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it might be, I'm investing my time and my energy in that. So there's a bit of kind of cost in terms of my appreciation. And that relationship is built through that kind of reciprocal investment of time and energy. And so it's really about that kind of relationship is built through someone deciding to spend time with you. And the only way they can decide to spend time with you is when you have a long form content really, or a product or a service that allows them to kind of engage and invest their time. So if you're providing value for an audience, that means they are able to spend time with you and get that reciprocal value back, then that's when you're really building up that brand affinity, that loyalty that's going to stand you in good stead for the long term.
I've been thinking a lot about Joe Rogan and why he's so successful. I think he's in part political phenomena, part very underrated in terms of how smart he is actually, and how he pretends to be. But do you think that same trend is a reflection of Joe Rogan's success? Do you think he's successful because he's going long form and people are so invested?
Yes, so I think that Joe Rogan, there's a sort of wider phenomenon that I'm not sure you can make the direct analogy with brand marketing, but there's certainly some parallels. So, if we think about the way in which media has gone to try and marry the advertising world, so we think about like The Guardian and the New York Times have all these ads on their websites and have not really succeeded in building a subscription-based business. What they've done is they've kind of capitulated that world and turned it into clickbait and really quick, like snappy headline, this sort of stuff. And advertisers have created that as well. It's just about getting that hook, getting that initial dopamine hit. And Joe Rogan, in that sense, has gone the other way in media. And he's really not about snappy headlines. It's just long form conversations. He's a very good interviewer. Like you say, he's kind of straddled an interesting kind of political position in that he doesn't really engage with the Twitterization of politics and culture, which is all about like dishonest representations of ideas and attacking each other and all that kind of thing. And he's just kind of gone back to that and gone, I'm just going to have a chat with anyone. So it stands kind of interesting there. But the fact that it's long, that it's in depth, that it's just sort of like got that fluidity to it, I think does again hit against the sort of the ecosystem of ads, which are all about hooks. And the same is true with like media, and it's all about social media optimization. It's all about just basically manipulating the audience into triggering different neurochemical responses from them. And that's not what we see with Joe Rogan and other longer form content, where it's all about that investment someone's going to have in time. They get a lot of value from the conversation or the particular content in question, but it's not like triggering them in a sort of neurochemical sense to immediately hit dopamine or push loads of buttons or anything. It's not about that. It's about actual conversation rather than emotional triggers. And I think that's where it's succeeded.
I'm curious. There is some really great long form content that I personally love. Dan Carlin, for example, Hardcore History is absolutely, it's just something else. I listen to every episode. What have you found for yourself? What long form content do you enjoy? What do you remember? What sticks out to you?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I'm on like a personal level. Yeah, I listen to a lot and watch a lot about kind of like I'm very interested in like history of art and philosophy. So I read a lot on that, and there's been like lots of courses and things people have put together. A lot of music stuff. So I really enjoyed the BBC did a series about like. They explored one piece of music and talked to people about how it's influenced them. And, it's like 2 hours exploring a single piece of music. And I loved all that. So, yeah, I've moved around different kind of weird little subcultures and communities. And I tend to kind of get obsessed week by week with a different thing, I think. So, yeah, it's a funny old time. At the moment, yeah, I'm currently in a kind of binge of musical stuff about like deep musical theory and that kind of stuff. So that's been interesting.
Yeah, it's funny how everybody is part of a tribe, but then across the internet you'll suddenly find 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people who fall into that tribe.
Totally, yeah, exactly. And often it's like really specific and strange and esoteric, and people come together in like a subculture for a certain odd thing, and they may be they'll be members of all these different communities, and there'll just be one thing that unites them, and they start talking about it, which is lovely in some sense, but it's also kind of exacerbated a lot of really dreadful sides of tribalism and that that part particularly I think that we see on Twitter and Facebook, where the job is to divide people into groups as possible, where they will hate each other on whatever innocuous, completely irrational issue it is today. So yeah,
there is a tribe for everyone on the internet, whether we like it or not. Also the ugly stuff, right? That actually is a good bridge to the question of distribution for long form content. How do you think, or what do you think are some of the best practices of distributing long form content, making it accessible and available?
Sure thing. So I think the essential principle to bear in mind is that everything has to be kind of optimized for the platform that it's being distributed on. The mistake that people make constantly is to sort of think in terms of old money TV. So I think, okay, I've got this asset, I've spent money on this thing, therefore I just need to get it out to as many people as possible in as many locations as possible, and that's the way we're going to distribute it. But that doesn't really work, and it doesn't really make any sense. What you need to do instead is think about cultivating your audience and your fan base. And the way you do that is by really speaking to them in the most meaningful way where they are at any given point in time and context. So it's not like we tend to assume it's like Facebook is one audience, YouTube is a different audience, Twitter is different. Like, this isn't true. It's all the same people. It's just they're in a slightly different context at each point, and you need to meet them where they are. So that means essentially, like, you know, for example, YouTube is really good for trailers and it's really good for clips. So think about it from a media perspective, like how you're going to get people to watch all your stuff. You want them to see those initial segments, and you want people to kind of consume as much as they can. Often, if you just shove out like your full long form piece of content on YouTube and Facebook, no one's going to sit there and watch it, because when they're on those platforms, they tend to be in a sort of more of a browsing mode. YouTube, they might go there specifically, but that's normally when they are specifically trying to find a piece of content and they're going to a destination. But you do much better when you basically create like different clips. So YouTube, there might be 2 to 3 minute clips. Facebook, they're often 30 seconds to 1 minute, and they are like, you know, with these captions maybe surrounding it, and you really optimize for that context and that location to give people a taster of what you've got. Then the key principle is always, well, how do we then drive people to that next meaningful engagement? And that means often moving them between platforms. And I think that ultimately, you know, from a business perspective, what you want to do is drive the most value yourself. And I think you do that most effectively when you have the full content on your website, where people can go there, they can subscribe, give you the email address, watch the whole thing distraction-free, no ads. And then you use all the social platforms to sort of deliver the clips and the trailers that are going to really generate that engagement on social media, and then drive people who are, you know, interested to engage a bit further to a platform that you control. So it's basically like thinking of yourself like a media company, doing exactly the same thing that the New York Times does, that Netflix does, that Amazon does. You know, social media is great to capture attention, and then you need to build your own owned platform to drive engagement. And that's really the way to think about distribution more holistically. And within that, each platform needs its own optimization. That means its own aspect ratio, its own length, its own structure, and all that kind of thing. So you have to kind of get quite savvy with understanding different platforms and what works best on them.
I love that. That's exactly how I even think about the stuff that I'm doing. So I think that's perfectly on point. You're obviously very much into music. I see 3 guitars in your background, and I see...
Yeah, I have lots of toys, piano and saxophones and stuff, yeah.
I love that. I see a record player and some vinyl records.
Mm-hmm.
You have all my respect for that. Absolutely love vinyl. Yeah, but that being said, say you started, or say you were responsible for video marketing at a music startup, and you know, let's just say it's an app for musical theory. I wasn't able to come up with a better example. But what I'm curious about is, you know, if you had to attract and build an audience with long form video, how would you do that? What would be the first points you would think about?
So the most important thing is defining and identifying a proper niche audience. So the thing that causes the greatest failure with everyone attempting a strategy is they've not really made the content for anyone. They've just assumed that they have like this customer base or potential customer base they can target. And it ends up being like very fluffy, not very specific, and not very useful. So the key and most important thing, and the thing that I consistently always come back to businesses on, is they think they've got a good idea, but usually they don't. And the reason they don't have a good idea is because they've really not identified who they're going after in a meaningful way. And really what you need to do is build it for an existing community of people that talk to each other. That's how you generate word of mouth. That's how you distribute it further. So you have to really identify who you're going after, and then work out what they care about and start to make something that's like the best thing on the internet for that particular community. And that's the most important thing to start with. The other complex of that, while that is also the reason why most things fail, it's also the reason why not very good content can succeed. You can get away with all manner of mistakes production-wise and distribution-wise if you've really nailed your target audience and you really have made something great for them. They are so much more forgiving of bad production if you have created something unique that really speaks to them on a, you know, kind of very personal level. So that's the thing you have to go after. Yeah, so that's the way to start. And then you need to start to think, well, okay, well, how can we scale this? How can we build a repeatable format for this particular topic or this audience that's going to really resonate with them? Try a bunch of things out and know that it takes kind of time to arrive at something that's really good. You're not going to get it right first go. You're probably going to need 10 to 20 episodes to really start finding your feet for whatever it might be that you're creating. So, you got to get good at this, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes time to find your brand voice. Once you kind of built that up, that's when you can start thinking about really optimizing that distribution and that network. That said, there's also a lot of value in distributing before you create. So if you can build up a lot of buzz, and you can build up, you can release little trailers, you can start to build up a community of people who might be interested. Then you can launch with a bit of a big bang, and you have an existing audience who are willing to share what you're doing. So, you can definitely tease and talk about something before you make it. But just, again, the key thing is finding those people who are going to really care about what you're doing, and making stuff for them. So that audience identification is like 90% of the challenge, I think, when you're starting out.
What are ways to find and identify and really shape that audience out? Are there any platforms, sites, tools people can use? Is there a methodology or framework?
Yeah, I've been using SparkToro a ton since that came out to do this. So, you can just basically, what you need to do, work out who your customer base are, and then find examples of like prototypical customers, and start to work out, well, what else is going on in their lives? What else do they care about? What else are they doing? And that's going to give you a lens into discovering and exploring different topics and different kind of communities. SparkToro is great for that, because you can just put in like an interest group. So say I discovered that I was making something for like a load of builders, and I discovered quite rationally that something that a lot of builders are interested is like trucks, because they're carrying stuff around, like they care about that. Okay, well, let's find out on the internet, like, who are the most influential people for trucks, and then I can find this community. Okay, who follows the most influential people? And you can start to build up this actual database of potential target audience, and then you can break them down, look at what they really care about, look at what they're doing already on social media, meet some of them, ask them, and that is how you essentially build up this picture and this narrative of who you're going after. The other thing you can do is just like use Reddit. So if there's a subculture, there's a subreddit, and there's always a community on there talking about stuff. And if you can find active subreddits and see that they're slightly underserved in terms of media, then that's when you can come in and do something interesting. So it's about thinking kind of orthogonally about who your customer base is, because your customer base is not like, usually we, as businesses, we start to talk about our customer base as if they're like a homogenous group that talk to each other. Now, it's very rarely the case. They're normally, subsets of different communities and groups that often don't interact. So you need to identify, okay, well, what are those communities within our customer base? And pick one, basically. And it's usually for most companies, it's going to be narrower than your wider customer base. That doesn't mean, but there are instances where if you have a very, very niche product that only appeals to a few people, you need to think slightly broader and slightly more about that community. But the key thing is discovering like who is already talking to each other about a thing, and let's make stuff for them.
Yeah, Reddit, very, very powerful. Totally see that. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about the Wistia versus YouTube type of narrative. I personally know what it's like to compete against YouTube as a former member of Dailymotion, and I can talk about a couple of stories back then. But I'm curious about your personal opinion, but also about what it feels like inside of Wistia, to go up against such a giant, or maybe YouTube is not even perceived as a direct competitor. You tell me.
Yeah, no, well, it's interesting actually. I would say that like within Wistia, I'm probably one of the only people that are dealing with that competitor thing day to day and thinking about it a lot, because it's very important for our positioning and it's very important for our differentiation, but it doesn't really affect the product roadmap. It doesn't really affect much else, because YouTube's gone a different direction. It serves ultimately a different audience. So Wistia is making stuff for businesses who want to build that long-term kind of brand. And YouTube's really not serving those businesses as much as it is the advertisers that serves those businesses. So we're trying to make stuff for like those businesses who get squeezed in the middle by YouTube's big audiences of like creators and advertisers. And that means that we end up making a lot of different product decisions. So it's not so cute. But obviously it's the major question that Wistia always gets in terms of marketing, in terms of how it expands. So that becomes an interesting problem for me as a kind of brand marketer to work out how to position ourselves differently. It's an interesting challenge, but it's not been a major problem thus far, I think, because the major challenge is just getting people to think more about platforms. And again, it comes back to, for me, the problem is once you understand that there's a lot of different platforms, and the goal of video is not just like spray and pray. You're not just trying to get it out there to as many people as possible. You're trying to cultivate and build an audience and that kind of thing. You then start to think about these different platforms for what they are. And YouTube obviously provides values that Wistia doesn't, and Wistia provides values that YouTube doesn't. So you have to use them both to make sense for the platforms in question. And you have to, kind of build a strategy that takes advantage of all the different distribution channels that you have. And that usually, as I kind of mentioned to start, it means Wistia is great to build your hub content on your website, and then you can use your trailers and your clips and your shorter stuff to really entice and build that wider reach that you get on YouTube. But what you don't want to do is build your all of your video strategy on YouTube. The major error that I see companies make is they just shove everything on YouTube and hope for the best. But the problem with that is you're just basically gifting Google free traffic, and they give you nothing in return, really. You might get exposure, but exposure is not necessarily that valuable in and of itself. What you really need is engagement. You want people to be really watching what you're doing, engaging with everything that you do, and becoming more engaged over time. And YouTube is not necessarily the best platform for that from a business standpoint. So you have to kind of like use the two carefully together and make sure that you're working out how to do it. So it's just about like, don't build your house on rented land. Don't build everything on YouTube, because every little change that YouTube can make can really come and scupper your strategy. You want to own your audience at the end of the day. And the two most valuable assets I see in all businesses is like a good email list, very important, and you need to build it up. And anytime you can capture an email or drive someone to your website, those are the actions you should take. And you have to use social media to that extent. What social media would love for everybody to do is just delete their websites and build everything on social platforms, of course. But the world we're heading towards is one where Google and Facebook control all marketing spend, and you don't want to be caught up in that. You need to kind of make sure that you've hedged for that and built a bit of a fortress that you can own. Otherwise, you're just going to find that costs rise, margins decrease, and you can't necessarily survive, because every business is going to be competing to just spend more and more money on these platforms. So you need to think a bit more strategically, I think, than just giving Google and Facebook all your money. But that's what most businesses do. So at Wistia, it's like, okay, well, we're providing an alternative to that. And the best way to use it is in combination with the social platforms as well.
You got my vote for sure. And just to point it out, you rank #1 for the keyword Wistia versus YouTube. Granted, YouTube doesn't rank at all, so you got that mark ticked. And I love that.
Should I hope so that link building paid off?
Yes, exactly. All the link building paid off. And what I love about this is that it's basically an explainer of what's the difference between Wistia and YouTube. And what I loved is that you recorded 2 videos. One is uploaded on Wistia and one is on YouTube. I found it was a pretty cool gangster move to upload a video, a Wistia video on YouTube.
Shout out to Meryl Ayres, who came up with that idea. It was a good one. She doesn't work for Wistia anymore, sadly, but she's brilliant.
Yeah, I really love that. And speaking of SEO, I'm curious if you have noticed any differences in things like YouTube thumbnails from Wistia or from YouTube. I think that's a question that I've encountered a couple of times. If I use a video that's hosted with Wistia, do I get video thumbnails in Google search as well?
Right, you do, yes. So Google do treat YouTube differently. So everything uploaded to YouTube is automatically indexed and visible. With Wistia, you need to do that little bit of extra work, which is just we automate it. Just make sure you're including the JSON LD or the schema so that people can see the videos and see that it's indexed, and the crawlers can make sure it's visible. But you can get a video ranking for any page with any platform. So there's not like that there's any kind of platform bias from an SEO perspective, but there is a sort of, if you like, a kind of authority bias towards YouTube from like a domain perspective. So Google's perspective is kind of like, if nothing else, then YouTube. If it requires a video, then YouTube, unless there's something better that comes in. So particularly as you're starting out, if you're just aiming for kind of SERP real estate, you might find that YouTube is the way to do that, and you're going to get the results there. But in those cases, I would normally think like you want to kind of hedge your bets. So you can put it on YouTube, but also put it on your website with the Wistia embed. See which one's working, and see if you can move stuff so that you're capturing more of the traffic rather than sending it to Google. And again, like tweaking the content for the platform. So if you have longer content, put that on Wistia, and shorter content on YouTube, so you can kind of again, capture the interest as it comes up, but making sure that you're offering a different option in each platform and then allowing people to kind of differentiate as they need it. So yeah, it's a tricky one to navigate with that specific like optimization, but I would always encourage companies to like think longer term about making sure that they're capturing the traffic rather than gifting it all to Google just as a sort of short-term solution to what is ultimately a longer-term problem of audience development. And there's all that like SERP optimization, but really you need to think about how we're actually building our customers, and it's very hard to do that if you're sending all your traffic to YouTube. So, but yeah, you can get videos ranked on any platform. There's not a particular platform bias that Google has, except that it automatically gets all the data from YouTube, which offers a certain level of not preference, but like automation and an easier route into ranking, I suppose.
Speaking about SEO, you were an SEO yourself in a former life. Speak about that transition from SEO to brand and marketing strategist.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still an SEO, I suppose, in many ways at heart, and that was, I mean, so my initial route into marketing was through like video, I suppose, in the sense that I studied film and theatre at university and worked in that world for a while. So I've always been kind of a creative. And then I sort of ended up working for an agency called Distilled, and from there kind of learned the more technical sides of SEO and website building and basically all technical marketing and having that kind of broad base. So if we think about that T-shaped marketer thing, I've kind of got that T, and now I've got a few areas where I have deep expertise, and SEO is one of them, video is another, brand is another one, and I'm slowly trying to complete the set, I suppose, and I end up going down those routes where I get interested in a certain thing and then spend ages learning about that. So analytics is the next one. Need to get really good at that, but get in there.
Yeah, there's always something to improve, right? But I'm curious, what is it? I mean, you still probably have a footing in SEO, I suppose, at least that's what it looks like from the outside. But what does it feel like having a different focus right now? I think that's what a lot of SEOs wonder about. It's like, hey, how would I think about SEO if that was not my core focus or my core role? Talk about that a bit.
Well, so I think the most important thing that I've recognized is both a blessing and a curse in that, for me personally, I think SEO is the perfect grounding to understand broader marketing, because it forces you to think and understand a huge amount of concepts that most marketers don't understand. And I would say that most other marketing disciplines are quite discrete and siloed, and you can just learn a bit about email, just learn a bit about PPC or ads, and you don't need to learn the rest of it. But SEO forces you to learn a bit of everything. And that's why I think it gives you that particular skill. And for me, the best marketers that I deal with tend to have a bit of SEO knowledge, at least, or a background there. So I think so. To know that you have a superpower if you know a lot about SEO that most marketers don't have is a good thing. The other problem is most marketers don't understand a thing about SEO. The 95% of marketers you come across don't understand it at all. And that's a real problem, because it's hard to sort of get buy-in. People don't understand how to value it. They don't understand the principles behind it. They think it doesn't work when you've just started out. They're used to sort of commoditized purchasing. So it's that, as everybody knows, is a huge challenge. But for me, it's been, I think it's very useful to have that grounding, and I would continue always to try and understand, the latest updates, what's going on, understand the landscape, because I think that's where the really top end and interesting parts of marketing are materializing, even if they then bleed into other areas like brand. So the reason that I've got into brand is through SEO, in the sense that I started to look at metrics and start to understand a bit more about what was going on through search, and noticed that certain actions would have impact on search that others wouldn't. And a lot of that was around, like content creation and what kind of content's delivering the most value in terms of brand search impressions. Well, that's a SEO question to some extent, but it's also one about brand marketing. And through that, I then expanded my knowledge and started to perhaps, I think, bring a unique, technical and data-driven perspective to brand marketing that, in my view, makes me stand out amongst a lot of other people in that space, because I know how to measure it and nobody else does. And that's something that I think most SEOs also have, but it's just a case of applying it to that wider space.
Yeah. I think 1,000 people listening to this now told themselves that, you're preaching to the choir when you said that most marketers don't know a thing about SEO, and it's really a problem. And it's part also our own responsibility because we don't do a good enough job in educating everyone. But that's like a fight that a lot of SEOs fight on a consistent basis.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And I think it's partially our responsibility, but it should be the responsibility of all marketers to learn it. And it's not enough to say it's not my wheelhouse and I don't understand it, because if you continue to do that, you will get left behind.
Yes, and the content is out there, right? Like you can educate yourself. So I guess it's a shared responsibility. And I wonder, what does your day-to-day look like now that you are in this brand and marketing strategist role at Wistia?
I'm doing a lot less sort of short-term, day-to-day kind of deliverables. It's a lot of long-term planning, thinking, working out strategy, messaging, audience definition. So kind of a lot more about positioning and measurement and understanding, trying to kind of build up an understanding internally within the business of where we're going and what the story is going to be. So I'm spending a lot more time thinking about stories and thinking about how to tell them, and perhaps a little bit less time actually kind of doing the day-to-day stuff and recording and writing things. But it's been interesting and fun.
It sounds like a dream job, though. So it's like really exciting, especially because so much marketing moves towards the direction of performance marketing, where everything has to be quantifiable, everything has to lead to a dollar, and be justified. So I'm just wondering about your perspective. What's it like to play the long game and really focus on all the nice juicy things like audience positioning and brand building?
Well, it's good. I mean, so I think Wistia is very fortunate, and one of the reasons why I've continued to work at Wistia for a long time now is that they get it, and that Wistia understands that it's a long game and doesn't very much think in terms of the short-term funnel stuff. Now, I think we could actually do a better job at being more short-term focused, and there's a lot of plumbing at Wistia that maybe isn't as good as it should be in terms of marketing infrastructure. But we've always been very good about thinking long-term about brand, and so it's been a pleasure to be able to come into a company where that is understood and that sort of thinking is valued and respected. So yeah, I think it's just a great fortune. I think about the way Wistia works and the way it has historically been built through the embracing of creativity, and that's always been the main thing that Wistia is driven by. So it's very easy to slot in a bit of kind of good brand thinking and brand marketing there. So I'm just very fortunate in that regard, I think.
What's something you can learn from music and music theory about brand building and telling stories?
Oh goodness, that's an interesting question. So, well, I think this is a very simple one, but maybe that the best ideas are always around, are always simple, and in music, it's about theme and variation. It always is. So it's always about if you need that single idea that people immediately understand and can key in with and remember, and then take them on a journey through that. And the same is true with all kind of brand marketing. Like they need to get the idea instantly. They need to understand the principle, and then you need to take them on that journey through the idea, exploring it. So it can't be a disintegrated mess of kind of different random ideas. You need that consistency, but it also, that idea needs to be easily understood. If you can't explain it to your, just some random person in the pub, it's not clear enough. It's not good enough. And that's true of music as well. You have to be able to sing the theme, and someone has to be able to pick it up and remember it. That's the essential truth.
How did you get so deep into music?
I don't know. I am that deep into music. I just have a lot of. I think it's just the nature of my office. I've got a ton of musical toys in it. But no, I'm really into theatre. Is the main thing I'm really into. But I can't get a theatre in my own apartment, so I've just got a little bit of musical. I have a kind of musical themed office room, I suppose. And when I'm not writing, I'll take a few minutes just to play some piano or guitar or something, and use that as a bit of an inspiration. But yeah.
And what got you into theatre?
I guess Shakespeare, really. I think I loved Shakespeare. I just always did, and I got with the writing immediately, and just understood the genius of the characters, and just ended up loving it and exploring it, and that became a kind of fundamental passion. Got into opera and got into all sorts of things, and yeah, that's me.
Opera sounds a lot like long form content.
Opera is definitely long form content. Opera is a great example. It's often very simple stories told beautifully, with as much expression as possible. So,
What's your favorite? Okay, I'm gonna ask only one more question about the subject of music and theater. But what's your favorite Shakespeare play, and what's your favorite opera?
Favorite opera is probably Aida and or just but just everything Verdi really, and then um, Shakespeare. Let's go. Measure for Measure. I'm currently very interested in. Um, but I don't know. Macbeth is brilliant as well. There's a few you can't really the whole work. He said everything about everything really. I'm actually thinking of maybe doing some long form content myself about Shakespeare tenuously applied to marketing. So we'll see if that comes out.
You should absolutely do that. I'm sure that's what we talked about earlier, right? I'm sure there's a huge fake Shakespeare fan tribe out there on the internet, right?
I think it's just me and Jono Alderson, but that's enough. That'll do.
Jono, such a good guy. Shout out at this point. I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to wrap this up. But there are three more questions,
Sure.
3 short questions that I'd love to ask you. The first one is, what is something really weird about you?
I can lick my own elbow. Not many people can do that. There we are.
Wow. I'm impressed. That is. I wanted to ask you, okay, show, but you just did. This is, wow.
You got to back it up.
The second question would be, what have you changed your mind about recently?
Gosh, I mean, well, so this one, I used to think the biggest threat to, civilization was, perhaps like bad ideas or the environment, and now I realise that it's just somebody trying to eat a bat. So that's been an interesting revelation. Maybe topically. So I think I used to think social media was a net good for society, and I've now gone fully on that. It's probably a net negative. So I'm a bit bullish on moving away from social media from a personal perspective, not necessarily as a marketer. I'm not wholly convinced it's doing us any good.
Absolutely fair.
Oh, I have a musical, and I've kind of understood and got into country music, and I used to hate it, but now I've come around on that one.
Oh yeah, that's a journey that I still have to accomplish. I think I'm not there yet, but I'm open. And then the last one of the 3 questions would be, how has failure set you up for success?
Gosh, that is a great question. I will answer on a sort of personal level, I suppose. I've gone through plenty of certainly early in my career, some difficult financial times, and struggled with not having much work and not much money, and I think that has always left me very appreciative and quite hungry for the work that I'm doing, and not taking for granted any sort of it's a great privilege to work in marketing, where you can earn a lot of money and people are generally great to work with, and you can sit down at a desk and work from home, and all that stuff. I think we should be very grateful for. So that set me up for success. Is I don't take anything for granted, and I'm not entitled. And I think I've over the course made every mistake you can in terms of like campaigns measurement. I've overspent on PPC. I've forgotten to turn things off for clients. I've undersold projects and had to take a loss on them. All these things. So, and I think each one you learn from and you improve. So, I'm hoping that I'm going to continue to fail in new and interesting ways over the next few years.
I love that. That's such a good way to end on that note. Everybody, of course, you can find Phil on Twitter under Phil Nottingham, on LinkedIn as well. You want to go to wistia.com. Phil, anything else that I forgot to plug or to mention?
I don't think so, no. I would just say, if you want to see what some good long form video is, check out what we're doing at Wistia, wistia.com/series, and you can watch all the stuff we've come up with there, and always appreciate any feedback anyone has.
Thank you. And all of these links will obviously be in the show notes. Phil, I want to thank you so much for coming on, not just because you shared a ton of wisdom with me today, but also because, you recently had surgery. And so, you're a real hero. I appreciate that so
No
much.
problem. Thank you, Kevin. It's been lovely to just, been sort of the first thing I've done since my surgery. So nice to get back on the horse and feel like I'm doing something productive.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on the show. And I'll speak to you soon.
Lovely. Take care. Thank you.
3, 2, 1.